Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the second time recording this audio today because the first time I recorded it, I did not turn on my microphone. Imagine my delicious surprise after talking for 40 minutes. I think it happens to all of us. And I first got into a bad mood, but then I realized, wait a minute, I'm actually talking about something I love. So I can go on about this. I can go back into this. And actually, I have now the opportunity to do it even better. I see it as a sign of God to do what I was supposed to do, but then in a better way. So let's start from the beginning. Hello. Anybody out there? I love that intro. I think that's going to be my new intro for a while. Also, for my sponsors, I will speak about my sponsors. It's always weird to do so because there's kind of the aspect of me that goes like, it feels like I'm selling out, but it isn't. It isn't, because the more I spend time with the people that sponsor me, the more I realize, man, they're helping me out beyond what I deserve. So I'm very grateful for them. And one of the sponsors that I have is Braus. Man, the equipment and the stuff they give me are fantastical. I just wish that the Pakistanis would stop calling me. Nah, I'm joking. The material they have, the stuff that they provide, and the things that they do is fantastic. I mean, their gis, I use them now. I went to the World Championship, World Masters, and was able to compete there. And I was using a Braus gi. And honestly, one of the best feeling gis ever. Felt confident, felt good, looked good. All black in the Braus Pro Light. And it was fun. I also worked with them a little bit and got to know everybody. And they're just fantastic people. They're humans. They're people. They're not like a company. They're a company, definitely a company, but also they are people. And I think that's what most attracted me to them. It made me stay and made my mind change into like, I can work with these guys forever. Yeah. Who knew? I'm very happy to work with them, and I'm very grateful for all the opportunities they have given and for helping out this podcast that I'm doing. So yeah, big shout out to Braus for helping us out and for giving us the opportunity. Now, on to the beautiful part of this little podcast. So last time I was talking to you guys, I gave you a little bit of a sneak preview of who we are going to talk about. And we are going to talk about Jigoro Kano. Now, I'm butchering that name because I'm doing it in the Portuguese name. So it's a Japanese name, but I'm speaking it with a Brazilian Portuguese accent. So that's how I learned it. And I don't know, I affectionately say it in the same way. So out of affection, Jigoro Kano. But please feel free to look up the proper pronunciation of his name. And yeah, that is it. Let's get into it. Let's get into the life of Jigoro Kano. Now, before I do continue in this, there is a lot to his philosophy and the book he has written and his way of teaching and the idea behind what he's actually doing. There's a lot to it. So one of the things that I was thinking of, and one of the things that I'm going to do is, in this episode, I will speak about his life. In the next episode, I will go into his book, Mind Over Muscle. And that is a very interesting book with the philosophies behind the creation of Kodokan Judo. So it's going to be worth the while, and I think it will do justice to the whole story of Jigoro Kano. Now, as you know, I am kind of into philosophy. That's the whole idea about this podcast, is the why we would fight. Why is that such a mesmerizing, fantastic idea? And why am I so attracted to it? And why are hundreds of, maybe even thousands of people attracted to the idea of having their own gym and having their own thing and leaving their life behind to purely pursue the martial arts and jujutsu and teach and fight the whole day, every single day? What is wrong with them? Now I realized there must be more to it, so I went down the huge rabbit hole that is doing martial arts, and it has been a journey, and it's a fantastic journey. So I'm happy to share this with you. Now, 2-part series. First part is going to be on the life of him. And if you do enjoy this and you're more interested in it, then the second part is coming out, talking about his book, Mind Over Muscle by Jigoro Kano and the creation of Kodokan Judo. Now, let's get into it. Last time that I stopped by explaining a little bit what the situation was, what the environment was in Japan at that time. So it's really the death and the end of a feudal era where shoguns were in power, where there was no Western influence or very, very little of Western influence into Japan. And it was this shut off island from the rest of the world. And even the Mongol empires weren't able to take over. And they were, first of all, because of the storms and the sea. And second of all, they came to this island and there's just a bunch of warriors standing there taking over. So that led into eventually the Meiji Restoration, which was because of Western influence into Japan. And they were like, the Western world was very interested in Japan and the coal reserves and the resources they had. So especially America was then like, look, open up the gates, open up the doors, open up your havens, and open up your harbors and your borders. We need to negotiate. We need to get you into the industrialized civilization, into the world, because you're lacking behind. And Japan eventually went with the idea, especially to reestablish their emperor. And it ended up with the Meiji Restoration. So the death of the feudal era, the death of the era of the samurai, the death of the era of the shoguns, and this social class that you were born into ended, and then you have social mobility. And then exactly this time that Jigoro Kano was born. So Jigoro Kano was born on the October the 28th in 1860 in the Hyogo Prefecture in Japan. Now, this is probably as far as I will go with dates and locations within Japan. The reason for that is, I won't be able to say most of the words and most of the names that come up here. That's first of all. And I did take some time to check up on it, but I was like, I'm not going to do the due diligence of actually pronouncing the names correctly and actually... And that's not the focus of this. The focus is showing his life. And the dates, I can give them to you in the description. And that is about it, right? So he was born in this prefecture, and up until his 10 years old, he was mostly raised by his mother. His father at the time was working in Tokyo, what at that time was Edo, and then it changed to Tokyo. So he was working in Edo, which is the capital, and was mostly traveling back and forth. But his mother had the best part of the greater part of his education in her hands. And this is very important because from her education, which is she very much focused, or this is what the books and the information tells us, is she was focused on giving him as much of the idea of like, it's very important to take care of others. This unselfish, prepared to help others, prepared to help the neighbors, this mutual benefit kind of idea. This, I will take care of others first and then about yourself, and manners. These were very, very important to her. So there's little stories going around where Jigoro Kano would maybe get into trouble with another boy from the same area, and then he didn't apologize, and his mother would actually not forgive him for that until he went over and gave the proper apologies needed, so that she would forgive him, or he would have to go there and actually forgive the child, or talk and be very polite. If that didn't happen, then he would get home and get into trouble with his mother. So that was one of the things. And if there ever was kind of treats or cake or something like that to be given to the other children, then he would always get the smallest piece while the other kids would get the bigger piece. And his mother would teach that that was the important part, that give your best to others, a very caring person in a very, very selfless way. So she taught this selflessness to him as much as possible. Now, she did take care of him until the age of 10 when she died. And then the caretaking of Jigoro Kano went over to the father. So the father was taking care of the sons at that time. So the sons moved to the capital, Edo, which of course then again became Tokyo. And there the focus of the father was mostly academic. His father Jigoro Kano's father had an amazing intuition towards the necessity of education in this new era that Japan was walking into, in this industrialized new era that we're walking into. So Jigoro Kano had learned, has gotten from his father tutors that would actually teach him kanji and would teach him calligraphy and all these things, and English as well, so that he was more suited for this new era that was coming along in Japan, which was an amazing foresight by the father, which made the boy also turned out to be extremely gifted academically, very, very, very inclined academically, so easy learner, very much so, to the point where actually when he made 14 years old, he asked permission from his father to join a boarding school because he was so advanced. He was able to get into it. So he asked his father for permission to leave and actually live at what would become the University of Tokyo, and learn English. Now the father gave permission and he went to this boarding school. And now comes another little interesting part of his life. This is a 14-year-old, very small boy. Now, where Jigoro Kano was very gifted academically, he wasn't as gifted physically. So the older boys that were stronger and bigger and all these other things ended up bullying and tyrannizing him for a good portion of his stay there. So that's how boys actually interact with each other a lot. It's a lot bullying. It's very physical. And that made him pursue as well physical activities like sports and all these other things that he would be interested in, just purely out of wanting to become stronger. So this mentality of let's become stronger also was instilled in him. Like, I have to work out. I have to beat these bullies, or I have to at least get to a point where I can defend myself against them. So this was also around the time when he heard about jujutsu. At 14 years old, 15 years old, when he was at boarding school, he learned of jujutsu. So he started, of course, researching it and studying up on it and trying to read about it. And it was an interesting thing. Well, while at school, when he was 15, he learned from a classmate that a lot of the jujutsu practitioners at the time ended up not doing only jujutsu, because again, we are in a period of time when there was this change from everything that was feudal was kind of being left behind for the things that the industrialized world was bringing. So what all the Westerners were bringing in, they were actually accepting that more with a little bit of reluctance, but still accepting a lot of it. But jujutsu was one of those things that was kind of being left behind and saw as being something of the feudal times, especially with Westerners bringing modern weapons in. So jujutsu was left to be considered something of that feudal era, which meant that a lot of senseis, a lot of masters, a lot of practitioners of jujutsu had to find other ways to sustain themselves in this new economic time that came about. So this tough economic time that appeared, they had to find ways to sustain themselves and their families. So a lot of them became masseuses and osteopaths and chiropractors and stuff like that in that sense, just to maintain themselves economically. So he tried, of course, to join one of these schools, and they looked at him and they're like, come on, you're 15, 16, we're not going to let you. And that's a weird thing, but yeah, at that time, they took the sport so seriously that you had to have an age, a certain amount of, grown up. You had to be grown up enough to be able to do this. So they didn't let him join, especially because he was so small. But at the age of 18, when he was 18 years old, he actually found and spoke to somebody that was a jujutsu practitioner, an osteopath. And this older man, remember, this is an elderly man, said, yes, I am a jujutsu practitioner, but no, you can't train with me. And after Jigoro Kano gave this kind of passionate speech about trying to be stronger and all these things and defend others and teach others, this older practitioner said, okay, I'm moved by what he has been saying and by the intentions of him. So he ended up introducing Jigoro Kano to his very first teacher, Fukuda. Now, Fukuda had a school that had two styles of jiu-jitsu, Yoshin Ryu and Shin no Shinto Ryu. This is important. Why? Before we continue, like what we know now as jiu-jitsu and judo, there's basically one style of that. It's the style of judo, and there's the style of jiu-jitsu, as there is the style of folk wrestling and the style, but they're pretty much like, how do I say this? There's pretty much like an even way out of how everybody teaches. In jiu-jitsu, it's still very messy and very, very chaotic. So every single gym will teach in a slightly different way. But most of the moves are out there for you to learn. Now, at this time, every single school and every single other place has a different style completely of teaching. So half of the jiu-jitsu was about punches and kicks, and the other half was about throwing people, disarming people, capturing people, holding them, pinning them down. And a great part of it was about killing the person, and the other part was only just incapacitating them. Well, this is important for later. Right now, Jigoro Kano has joined his first school, and of course, that academically gifted mind of his excelled at something that is such a mind game, is such a mindful thing to do, like jujutsu. It's such a specific way of thinking and such a clever way of doing things and clever way of thinking that he ended up excelling so much that when Jigoro Kano was 19 years old, the 18th president of the United States, General Ulysses Grant, visited Japan, and a demonstration of Japanese martial arts was arranged to entertain the general, and the Fukuda Dojo was selected as the site for the demonstration. With the General Grant in the audience, Jigoro demonstrated randori. Now, what is randori? Randori is free sparring, like the normal sparring sessions that we have. That's what they did. And the general was very much impressed by this demonstration. Now, this is important because it gave Jigoro a lot of clout, is the best way to put it, I guess. Gave him a lot of attention, a lot of credit, a lot of good points. To the point that shortly after the visit of the general, his master, Fukuda, ended up dying. And Fukuda's family, which has been very impressed by Jigoro Kano's dedication and training, that they asked him to be Fukuda's successor. Jigoro Kano then became master of the Fukuda Dojo. To further advance his studies, Jigoro then entered the Tenjin Shinyo Ryu School under Masatomo Isu. Showing his usual education, he quickly earned the title of master instructor and became the assistant instructor. When he was 21, he entered by chance a jujutsu school competition that was held in the school that he was learning. So in the school he was at, where he was also later on teaching, in this school was held a tournament. And this tournament was organized by another jiu-jitsu school outside of the area where he was. So he happily joined. It's like a competition, so let's go. And that was the first, also one of the very important points, because that was the first time he realized there's a bunch of other schools out there, and they have their great, great strength, but also their very great weaknesses. And he saw all these different styles together, and then he was like, wait a minute, there's a lot to behold in this. This would be important for the creation of Kodokan Judo in the very, very near future. Now, as fate would have it, Masatomo Iso died the following year. In order to further develop Jujutsu, Jigoro began to seriously study Jujutsu at other Jujutsu schools to build on the strengths he had learned from the two schools in which he already studied. With two of his former masters dead, Jigoro became acquainted with Masao Yamamoto, master of the Kito Ryu school, and asked to become a student. Yamamoto responded by introducing Jigoro to Tsunetoshi Iekubo, and Jigoro began studying under him. At the age of 22, Jigoro became the instructor at Gakushuin in order to support himself, and he also opened a dojo of his own in a rented room at the Eishoji Temple. Using the money he had earned, he prepared a 12-mat dojo, which he called the Kodokan. At this point, he also changed his school from Jujutsu to Judo, at this time thus beginning Kodokan Judo. Now, I love this part of the story, because for anybody that has ever taught, has been an instructor in Jujutsu and started out for himself, this sounds familiar, like having a side hustle to maintain yourself, to be able to support yourself, and maybe even support your family, and at the same time having a dojo, having your own school, having your own place, and actually doing both at the same time, even if it's a little small 12-mat dojo. Man, that to think that somebody that created judo, the guy that created judo, was going through the same stuff is fantastic to me, because I went through the same stuff, and I know hundreds of you guys out there, hundreds of coaches went out there through the same thing. And yeah, man, it's a definite thing. It's very, very interesting to read this, and knowing that he rented out this little place and started teaching out over there. It's amazing. While gathering students and teaching judo, he also began to incorporate the principles of body, mind, and character development into his judo philosophy. The following year, Jigoro moved to his Kodokan dojo, first to a Kobunkan storehouse in the Kanda district of Tokyo, and then to another site in the Kojimachi district. All the while, he continued to draw upon the knowledge gleaned from various jujutsu schools in order to perfect his own judo methods for destabilizing and throwing an opponent. Around this time, Tsunetoshi, so the master or the sensei that was like teaching him now, so his third sensei, bestowed a Kito school license upon Jigoro and provided him with a wealth of reference material. So now not only did he have the Kodokan plus the license to actually open a school and all these other things, but he had an abundance in reference material to work with. So later on in life, when he was 27, he actually received the patronage of a viscount, which was, they don't actually mention which viscount that was, but he did receive the patronage of an aristocrat, which helped him a lot. And this man was very, very interested in Jigoro's judo philosophy. And Jigoro was able to move his Kodokan dojo to a spacious site in the Fujima district, which was a better district of Tokyo. This was also the period of his most intensive study and research. Interest in the Kodokan way of destabilizing and throwing an opponent had begun to grow, and the number of people petitioning for admittance to the Kodokan dojo increased with each passing year. Students from the Kodokan Dojo began participating in competitions such as the martial arts rallies held by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, and Kodokan Judo soon became a widely recognized name. In 1889, now this is very interesting, while en route to Europe on an educational study tour, the 29-year-old Jigoro gave a judo demonstration aboard ship to the mostly non-Japanese passengers while steaming across the Indian Oceans. The passengers were amazed and delighted by the ease with which a smaller man could throw a large one, and the power of Kodokan Judo thus became known beyond Japanese shores. Later on, about 4 to 5 years later, after this thing, the Kodokan mats, where he had in the beginning 12, became now 100 mat Kodokan dojo was built. The first foreigners were admitted to his dojo, and the number of foreigners seeking formal admittance increased steadily thereafter. This is amazing. In the meantime, so while he was doing that, and with he already had kind of an eye towards the globalization of the world and it turning English, and how English had become very important. Next to this, he was also working on having kind of a tutoring school. That's the best way to put it. So he had a tutoring school and he had the Kodokan Dojo, and he kind of combined both of them together. Because one interesting thing he did, but then we're going into the philosophy of it, is he had this belief that judo would make it easier for you to learn. Now, for you to be a good student and a good learner and somebody that was good academically, you also had to have the physical part taken care of. And he found that judo would be the best way. So he was combining the two, and his tutoring school and his Kodokan school, to become one thing. Very interesting thing that he was doing there. And I do believe in that. But this is just telling about his life. So this part of it is actually philosophy, and I will leave that to the next part. But very interesting to know that this is something that was going on at the same time. Funny enough, later on in life, so when he was about 31 years old, he was appointed to be counselor to the Ministry of Education, whereupon he retired from the Gakushuin. Now, he was doing the Gakushuin was just to maintain himself, so that was like kind of he was there teaching. But that was more of a side hustle to maintain the Kodokan stuff. He then got married and all these other things. And at this age, he was also, I think the most important part was that at this time, he also started to go deeper into education and started going deeper into schools and deeper into systems of education. And ended up, to a certain extent, becoming the headmaster of what now is the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Tokyo. He served also as a headmaster in the Advanced Teachers Training School. So you see that this man was very, very dedicated to education on the one hand, and Kodokan at the same time. It's very fascinating to have these two together. There's also a couple of honorable mentions, like he also helped, he also had a lot of support for the education in China. So the same thing he was doing in Japan, he also started doing back in China, which is, that's just an honorable mention. I won't go too much into that, because that goes more into the area of the education part of him and not so much in the area of the Kodokan. Now, this is very interesting, because this is now become in the part of the story where he starts to become this ambassador for judo, for Kodokan Judo, and he gets invited to be a representative of the Olympic Games, and he starts becoming invited and he's actually the first Asian to be admitted to the council of the Olympic Games and actually be a representative at the Olympic Games. And this is very important, because once he got admitted for that, he started actually opening up Japan to do trials to be part of the Olympic Games and actually starting to get judo into the Olympics. Now, this is very important because then you get to a point where Kodokan Judo, which was this relatively 12-mat dojo in a temple, is suddenly the sport that will represent Japan in the Olympic Games. And he wasn't just a representative for a couple of years. No. He was representative from around 39 years of age, something like that, up until 70. So he was still there at the Berlin Olympic Games. Shortly afterwards, he died. But for that period of time, he was influential in the Olympic Games. And that's how far he pushed judo into the world and had this ambassador's idea. Now, with that idea of ambassadorship of Kodokan, he also realized, man, I have to take my students and actually send them out into the world. And that is the amazing part. Now, I will stop right there and I will go into a little bit of the philosophy, and then I'll give you a little bit of a teaser for the next, how do I say this, the next important part of what's going to come. So let's say it like this. I'll stop. So let's go a little bit into the philosophy. So this was the story about Jigoro Kano and how he came to be, and how the Kodokan Judo grew so much. And it's short. I'm not going to go too deep into that. But this man really battled it out to put together judo and education together and implement it into the society and implement it into the culture. And I guess one of the main philosophies that he has is best described in the following way. Based on the lessons learned from his mother in early childhood and his father's philosophy of action, Jigoro had formed a spiritual outlook that called for maximum use of the mind and body, coupled with a desire to improve society, so maximum efficiency. And through the practice of judo, he had learned that in showing an opponent respect and gratitude, one fosters mutual trust and mutual assistance, and that one should not strive for one's own gain, but for mutual gain, mutual benefit. These were the two guiding principles that had stayed with Jigoro throughout his life. Jigoro had dedicated himself to the study of judo, and even when honor and position came to him, arrogance did not. Whether in judo or in scholastics, he never lost his burning desire to learn and improve. He was a man who constantly set new goals for himself and who always strove to play a useful role in the world. His famous creed of mutual benefit and maximum efficiency might even be said to show the way toward world peace. This man has spread, he did something amazing. He has spread the Kodokan Judo throughout the whole world as a means to make the world a better place. And by doing so, he did give us judo, and he did give us this amazing martial art, and he did give us a system of education and an idea and a philosophy behind it that is exemplary in any case. So that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about how he came to be and what his life looked like. And it's very, very interesting. There is a lot more to read about him. There's a lot more to learn about him. There are memoirs of his daughter writing about him, and he seems like a very, very strict father that was very, very into the rules. But there's also passages of his daughter speaking about, in memoirs, speaking about her father as being the favorite daughter, that he would give her a lot of love and attention, but he did rule the house with an iron fist. And he did spend a lot of time studying while he was married and while he had kids. A very, very dedicated man to his job and his work and the growth of what he was doing. And it's a very interesting read, I guess, if you want to see how somebody that is a little bit obsessed with what they're doing, how they work. And I'm thankful that he was that obsessed, to be honest, because maybe he wouldn't have gotten so far if he wasn't. The whole time he was doing this, he was still training. He would do 30 round sparring. He would do amazing training feats. He would do insane things during training and just kept going at it. As much as he could, he learned. And as much as he learned, he would teach. That's another thing. He didn't keep much to himself. He taught everything. He kept most of his notes in English, so he would teach them back in English. And a lot of his students benefited from that. One of these students and one of these ambassadors that were eventually set out into the world to introduce judo to the whole world was who I'm going to call personally Konji Koma, because I'm coming at this from a Brazilian jiu-jitsu perspective, and the name that we learned in Brazil was Konji Koma, and I will keep it like that, Konji Koma. I'll give you his real name next episode. That's what I'm going to do. Now, Konji Koma was sent out and eventually reached Brazil. And once he reached Brazil, he got into contact with a now very famous family that we all know and that that gave us Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He got in contact with the Gracie family. And he would teach Kodokan Judo to the Gracie family. Now, as a little teaser, he wasn't allowed to call it Kodokan Judo. I mean, Konji Koma eventually fell in love with Brazil and the area of Brazil and started to, how do I say this? Started to introduce Japan to Brazil and started making it easier for Japanese people to visit Brazil and to come over and to buy land and to all these things, and was a great ambassador to Brazil itself. Not only an amazing ambassador for Kodokan Judo, but he was also a fantastic ambassador to Brazil itself, to the outside world. And it's no surprise that we have in Brazil, we have a huge Japanese colony, for example, of immigrants that came over there. To this day, there's places in São Paulo and stuff like that is just full of Japanese people with Japanese ancestry. And there's a lot. If you want an example, the Meow brothers, man, Japanese ancestry. And there's so many more. There's a very rich history in that. But Konji Koma came over and met with the Gracies. And he wasn't allowed to teach Kodokan Judo because why? Well, Kodokan Judo is something you learned in Japan, and that was the decree they gave. They said if they want to learn Kodokan Judo, they have to come to Japan. So Konji Koma changed it, and it wasn't called Kodokan Judo, which was a trademark name. Instead, he called it jujutsu, or how we Brazilians pronounce this, jiu-jitsu, porra. But eventually that moved on and became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that is the next part of our story. So we'll go a little bit into the life of Konji Koma and how he met the Gracie family. And from there on out, from Japan to the world to Brazil, and from Brazil to the world again, that is the next part of our story. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope that it gave you a little bit more insight in how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came to reach even the shore of Amsterdam, where I am right now. And it's super interesting to me. Like, how did it come about? Like, how did it make this whole trip and end up right here in Japan, or right here in Amsterdam? More interesting to know is that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is there are gyms in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Japan, which is to me like a whole round trip around the world and then coming back home in a way. But I will focus on how it made its way all the way to Amsterdam. That is as far as I will go with this story. But there's still a lot to tell, and maybe I might go further even. But for now, that is the goal. So I hope to see you next time. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you got a lot out of it. So for next episode, I'm gonna go into Mind Over Muscle by Jigoro Kano. Oops, sorry about that. Mind Over Muscle by Jigoro Kano. These are the writings from the founder of judo. And then, if you're still interested, I'm going into the story of Jigoro Kano. In the story of Konji Koma, the man that actually brought Kodokan Judo to Brazil, renamed it Jujutsu, and basically created what we now know as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Was basically one of the founders of what we know as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Stay sexy. Oos.